one to another. My first thought when coming to interaction with you should be, how can I be kind? Your first thought when coming into interaction with other church people should be, how can I be kind? What can I do? What can I say? And there's a different level of kindness here. You know, like I said, opening a door for somebody, whatever it may be. But there's a level of kindness that most Christians never get to. Look at the next word there in verse 32. Tender-hearted. Most of our kindness in the church is a superficial kindness, hoping we don't have to get too involved. It's kind of like, how are you today? Oh, good. You know, we didn't even listen to the answer. But that's how we do things. We're just like, you know, I want to be kind on the surface, but I don't want to become too vulnerable, and I don't want them to become too vulnerable. Because if you allow somebody to understand that you're okay with them being vulnerable, you may just get dumped on. I remember one time I was in Wawa, and I asked the lady, I said, how are you doing? And she said, good. I said, is that just your standard answer? Are you really doing good? And there was nobody else in line, and she went, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, are you glad you asked now? I said, yeah, actually. And she was like, what? I said, actually, I'm a pastor. I said, I'm used to this kind of stuff. It's no big deal. I said, that ain't nothing. That's a normal day for a lot of people. Suck it up and get back to your job. No, I didn't say that. But the reality is, if you create that vulnerability, they're going to dump on you. They're going to say, hey, well, this is going on. And most of us don't want that. We're like, I want to be kind to people. I want to be known by the idea, the testimony that I'm kind, but I don't want to get to the tender-heartedness kind. Because that's a different level of really letting somebody feel safe and be willing to unload what's going on in their life. I had to look up some words. Number one, just because I'm a guy, tender-heartedness is just not in my vocabulary. It's just not. I don't know why. That's women's job, right? That's what the women are supposed to be. They're supposed to be the tender-hearted ones. They're supposed to be the compassionate ones. We as men, you know, it's not often that I shake one of my brother's hands. I'm like, you know, I'm so thankful you're so tender-hearted. You know, it's not common speech among men. And so I had to look up some words. I looked up tender-hearted, and I came up with very susceptible of the softer passions of love. Then I vomited on my... No, I'm just kidding. I was like, very susceptible of the softer, that's not a man word, passions of love. Ugh. It sounds like we're about to watch a Hallmark movie. And I'm like, ugh, where are we going with this? And our society has become so hardened that it is almost impossible to find a tender-hearted man. But it is needed that we would be tender-hearted men. Now, I'll be honest with you, I had to look up the word susceptible. Notice the women are laughing, the men are going, yeah, me too. The reality, susceptible is capable of impression, tender, impressionable. Oh, man. My heart is supposed to be of such that it is impressioned by the people I interact with. You know, I hate to do this, but there's just really an obvious illustration lately. When the doctor was stitching up my finger, we were conversing, my wife and her and I, and we were talking about how you can take a needle and shove it into somebody's body and then tie it off. And she goes, oh, it's easy to detach from patients. I'm like, oh, so I'm just a number. That's fine. But she was just being honest. She's like, it's just, you're a patient. You came in. I don't know you. There's no connection here. To her, it's her job. she's supposed to keep the blood inside my body. And so part of that was stitching me up. She said, however, if it's one of your family members, it's different. She said, you still have to do what you have to do, but there's a connection that you can't just detach from. And I thought about that, and I thought, I wish the church was like that. We're so quick to detach from family. Like, oh, I don't want to hear their problems. They've got too much going on. I don't want to get involved in that because, and listen, there will be people in the ministry that dramatize everything. Really. I mean, they'll have a little molehill, and before you know it, there's 4 presidents' faces on it. And it's a lot bigger. And you're going, how did you get there from there? I mean, that's crazy. Some of the people look around like, what's that have to do with 4 presidents? Okay, 4 faces, that's fine. I know, one of them was not a president. Okay. But the reality is, there are going to be people that just dramatize everything. And it's always bigger. But I've noticed over the years that when they dramatize things, it's because somewhere back in the past, something happened that they never got over. They've never dealt with it. And so it's continually being carried on, and every little thing that happens just sparks the emotions to that. Many times the emotions you're dealing with at the molehill have nothing to do with the molehill. It's because years and years and years and years and years of different things just pile up. And every time there's a little pressure or whatever, it just blows up. So then we as the church family, we go, oh, steer clear of them. I don't want to get involved there. Listen, there are people, I could give you names of people over the years that, I know this never happened to Brother McCullough, but as you walk in the church building, you see them, you're like, oh, they're here. Now, that hasn't happened recently, at least not since Sunday. But there have been times over the years where I walk in and I'm like, oh. There's some people like that. But people are just going to dramatize things. But the idea of being tender-hearted, that's a different level of kindness. That's a kindness where you'll take the time to be impressioned by what's going on in their world. Not just what's going on in mine. I've noticed this over the years. If I get involved in somebody else's world, it kind of makes mine seem not so bad. A lot of times. Just like, oh, man. I have done marriage counseling for years. In fact, I think I started marriage counseling before I even ever had a girlfriend. Weird. I just went with, I know what the Bible says, and I watched my parents. I'm like, yeah, the Bible said that, Mom and Dad did that, and so this would probably work for you too. But I remember counseling guys who'd been married longer than me, and I'm like, they went to the same Bible college, believe the same Bible, in good churches. Some of them sang in the same quartet. And I'm like, you should be able to work on some of this yourself. And then I'd go home and say, man, we have a great marriage. It's just wonderful. Why? Just because I got involved in somebody else's life, that they had some things going on, and I just come home and like, wow, I've got a wonderful wife, and she's got an awesome husband. Thank you for those that laughed. Those of you who didn't, wake up. But the reality of getting involved in other people's lives many times will distract you from what you think is so big in your own life. And many times, getting involved in somebody else's life, God will work out what's going on in your life when you get involved in somebody else's. He'll take care of what's going on in your world. And so we want to be to the place where we're tenderhearted, having that susceptible heart where we are open to be impressioned. Now, think about it, susceptible of the softer passions of love. That just, I'll be honest with you, the next men's conference I speak at, this will probably not be the topic. Because that's just not a man topic to watch. The next one I speak at, the Lord will be like, that's what you're dealing with. Oh, here we go. But we as men, we're just not programmed in the passions of love. We're just not. We're logical. I know this is not the thing anymore, but we're supposed to kill stuff. We are. If you are a guy and you've never killed an animal, you need help. I'm just saying that there's got to be something. And you say, well, I smacked a mouse with a shovel. That's a good start. But I'm talking about, purposefully pointing the gun and knowing when I pull this trigger, hopefully, that life is going to end. Now, I know some of you've done every level on Call of Duty. The reality of men are supposed to be the ones that provide for the family. And so killing things is good. I hope when this hits Facebook, I'm home because they're going to come here looking to take me to prison. But we're not really big on the tender-hearted, susceptible to the softer passions of love. It's just not where we're at. But it's where we're supposed to be. It is only within recent years that I have been able to say and receive from men, hey, I love you. And there are men sitting here that have said to me, I love you. But I know this about the men that have said it. They are walking with the Lord. And it's not a shallow surface thing. We as men struggle in the area of being tenderhearted. What hinders us from being tenderhearted? Past hurts. Just as I don't have many anymore. I have a few, but growing up on the farm, I would have calluses. I mean, severe calluses, just from farm work. And my brother and I we would take thumbtacks and we would just stab them just poke them in there and walk around school like, hey, hey, hey. And we were like, ah. The other guys, they're like, ow, softy. But what was that? It was just use and abuse, really, that would just cause a hardness that you could literally just sink a tack into. And unfortunately, most Christian men, their heart is that way. You could sink a tack into it and there's no feeling. Because there's been injury upon injury upon injury, and you finally get to a point where you just draw back and you're like, I'm not putting myself out there to be injured anymore. And so past hurts can cause us to be the absent or hard-hearted. The reality of not just past hurts, but not being honest about the hurts. Not saying, hey, man, I've been injured. I've been destroyed. And it could be at any level. I'm thankful I grew up in a home where my parents protected me. I never suffered child abuse. Now, I'll be honest with you, my mom smacked me around a few times. The fact that she didn't kill me makes her a very saint. The reality is, I didn't grow up where I was getting beatings for no reason. My dad, very calculated. Mom, she more had a level. And I don't know why. There was an idiot inside my body and loved to push that level. And then when we hit that level and that level hit back, I was like, why did you do that? But every strike that I took It was earned. I don't want you to get the idea that my mom, put on the gloves and beat me up in the face and punched me. No, put a whooping. But the reality is there are people who have suffered abuse and have never opened up about it. And so years later, they are very cautious about getting involved with anybody, about anything. And they'll just kind of recluse into their little world. I'm not opening this. And so there's a hard-heartedness there. Another thing that I found can cause hard-heartedness is dealing with some of those hurts. As the person on the outside, I've had to counsel some people through some things that are pretty tragic. And I've had to personally forgive people for things they've done to other people. That's difficult. When I really want to just go to their house, you don't know me, but you're about to. Pow, you can't do that. Some of them I would have to say, hey, you know me, and I know you, and I know what you've done, and we're going to deal with it. There's a hard-heartedness that can come from dealing with people and their hurts and then the people that hurt them. And so we need to be careful in this idea of being tender-hearted. I've got to remain impressionable. I've got to have a heart that's so tender that I can feel when others hurt. Hebrews chapter 4, verse 16 talks about Jesus. We have not a high priest who cannot be touched with the feeling of our infirmities. What does that mean? Jesus is tender-hearted. Jesus has the ability to feel. He's touched with the feeling of our infirmities. We're not normally touched with the feeling of other people's infirmities. We're like, oh, I'm sorry it hurt you. I'll pray for you. Okay, well, that's great. What are you going to do to help me? I have sat in this very sanctuary and had many conversations with people just unloading about all sorts of different hurts. And it is difficult when you're coming from a place where you've not really ever been hurt. There's been some hurt, but nothing that I look over and I go, oh, I'm so scarred from that. But I'm having to deal with people who are scarred. And so there can be a detachment just because of life experience. And so I've got to be in connection with Jesus so that I can feel at the level he feels. I can't feel because I've truly felt it, but I can be so impressionable in my heart that I can truly feel it. Many times we don't want to be tenderhearted because it makes us look soft. It really does. There's a running game through text to Pastor Bell. If you don't know about it, you've probably never been involved in it. What is this game? Who can make Pastor cry the quickest? Yeah. It's an kind of an unspoken game, but there are people across America who, I don't know if it's a conspiracy or what, but they just shoot me texts at different times to say things and see if they can make Pastor Bell cry. Now, I'll be honest with you. I cry quicker at a romantic movie than my wife does. Okay, so I just want to put that out there. I'm going to put out there for you, talk to her, and she tells you, because she gets pleasure out of saying that. But if we sit down to watch a romantic movie, we get the tissues and we put them on my lap. And you say, well, that's pathetic, that's sorry, that's sad. Is it? I have a problem watching a movie. Listen, I have cried at cartoons. I'm just going to be honest with you. It is not because the little animals involved are getting hurt. It's because of the principles that's going on. I just want to clarify where I cried. It was not where Bambi's mom was shot. I was like, that was a good shot right there. I get the tenderloins. No. But the reality is, when the story plot is going on and things are portrayed and the principles come out, that's where I get hit. Man, that's rough. And if it's a cartoon, I watch it like this. With the family over here. No, I got a headache. Oh, man, work was rough today. And sometimes it is intimidating being soft. Really is. But I think that's in the direction where God wants us. I think He wants us to be tenderhearted. By the way, you don't want a pastor that's hard-hearted. You don't. You come and you like, oh, pastor, this is going on. I'm like, oh, that's nice. I'll pray for you. I got things to do. So we need to have that tenderheartedness. However, this verse is not just for pastor. You know, if we had more tenderhearted people in the church, the pastor's job would be easier. I wouldn't have to be everybody's tender heart. And by the way, we have many tender hearts here. If you don't know who they are, that's just proof it's not you. But the reality is, we're all supposed to be tenderhearted. I'm supposed to be of a heart that I'm impressioned when somebody says something. You ever been listening to somebody's story, whatever it is, and you hear the facts, but it really doesn't penetrate? It's just like, oh. And then, okay, I'll see you Sunday. And there's no feeling whatsoever about their story. I don't want to be that hard-hearted for several reasons. One, if I'm that hard-hearted with people who bear God's image, I'm probably that hard-hearted with God. Because it is, especially in my case, it is my divine responsibility to minister to God's sheep. If I'm not tender-hearted to you, then I'm obviously not tender-hearted to the Good Shepherd. And so I don't want to be hard-hearted because I don't want God to have to warn me. You say, well, why is that? Well, God will send people to warn us throughout life. I mean, that's why most of the prophets were sent, is because Israel was hard-hearted. And those messages were sent, and I was looking at Ezekiel earlier today, and he told Ezekiel, he said, listen, they're not gonna listen to you. I'm glad I didn't get that message when God called me to pastor here. Listen, I want you to take Cornerstone Baptist. Now, they're not going to listen to you, but go work with them. That'd been great. I would have gone to Joppa, and I'm just telling you. So we have no idea. They're like, is that where Mount Rushmore is? But the reality of being tender-hearted is much deeper than just the kindness. That is taking time to invest, paying attention to what is said. Did you ever sit down with somebody who began to pour out their heart about, listen, I've found this out. Every family has swept things under the rug. Like just, and then pretty soon you've got Mount Rushmore in your living room. You're like, how'd that get there? Well, one sweep at a time. It just, there it is. And most of the family's oblivious to what's under there. They start digging around, they go, how many's ever been through an old attic? Like stuff has just been shoved up there for years, and then, go up and start going through it. And I remember when Pastor Weigel's, I guess it was his dad, passed away. And he called me, and we went down and cleaned out his parents' house. It's funny. He's the pastor where the kids went to school. He allowed Josh and Jeremy to get out of class to go clean out his house. I'm like, is that legal? But being I am who I am, I'm like, yeah, let's do it. I did question about the education my boys were receiving. No, I did not. But we went down there, and we're going through the attic. And my boys, like, they just wanted to live in the attic because there was so much cool stuff up there. And Pastor was like, oh, man, I remember this. And he'd tell us a story. And, oh, I remember this. And craziest thing, we opened this little closet, and he goes, oh, look at this, Dan. And I'm like, no lie, we're in the attic of the house. He pulls out a milking machine. And I'm like, what? I mean, we used to keep ours in the barn. And if they were broken, we'd put them down in the garage. Never brought them in the house. These people had it shoved up in the attic. And I wonder if they even knew what it was. Probably didn't know where it was. But we sweep stuff under and nobody wants to pull the carpet. Nobody. They'll walk around it. They'll walk over it. But nobody. And so they go through life just carrying all of that. And then they come into the church and we wonder why they have issues. Listen, the day you got saved, your sin's forgiven. But that doesn't mean everything in your past is forgotten. And that's what we need to realize. Oh, my sin's under the blood. Yeah, it is. But that doesn't mean you've dealt with everything that's affected you to here. There's been times I've had to walk through things from my childhood, and I go, wow, I didn't even know that affected me. The child labor was ridiculous. Nowadays, you're not allowed to get a job till you're 16. I'm like, what? Like, I didn't get a job till I was 19. I just worked like a dog up till 19. It wasn't a job because I didn't get paid. But the reality is nowadays, I think about it, I go, man, there's a lot of ways working that hard affected me. Most of them for the positive, by the way. There was a thing not too long ago that family farms were not going to be able to put their children to work till they were 12. I'm like, that's not going to be good. We're going to have all sorts of rebellious children. Yeah. But think about it. Just think about it for a minute. Go back through your childhood. And don't spend a lot of time, moping about it. But just think, there may be some things that have affected you. Some of them may be real deep and dark. You need to address them. You need to deal with them. Say, what is the problem with dealing with it? Well, number one is the hurt. Listen, that hurt and that damage you carry with you the rest of your life. Oh, you may temporarily forget about it, but there's going to be things, they call them triggers. Things that bring them up. Many times the hurt then puts you in a place where you feel damaged, and the humiliation of that keeps you from ever sharing. It's like, well, I don't want to say anything because it hurt. I don't want to say anything because it's embarrassing. And those deep, dark things need to be dealt with, but in a proper setting. That's not just something you go to another church member and go, hey, when I was a child, this happened, blah. But to actually, and you may come talk to me. If you're a woman, I'm probably going to pass you off to my wife and let you talk to her. She may just say, why don't you talk to him? I'll sit in the room. Okay, we can do that. But we need to get them dealt with. And thinking about that causes us to get to a place where we're no longer tenderhearted. Especially if you've had real deep, dark things happen. People can go through a lot and it doesn't even touch you because you've suffered worse. And so we get to a place in the church where we're just not tenderhearted one to another. We're just not. We have the random, how are you doing? Good. Okay, great. That means I don't have to be thinking anything, or I don't have to involve myself, become vulnerable, and listen to how bad your life is. But we want to reach a place where we're tenderhearted. Look at the next phrase, forgiving one another. It started out with be kind one to another, and then tenderhearted, forgiving one another. Why do we have to forgive one another? Because we didn't get the first one right. Yeah. You're going to have church people that aren't kind to you. They're going to say things. I mean, one of the biggest complaints we've had in the church is they looked at me funny, which is devastating. I mean, well, look back at them funny. I mean, I don't know. You know. Or they said this. My favorite one is two people in the church, not this church. It was my father-in-law's church. Just so you don't start judging each other. But one couple told me, we don't think she likes us, talking about an older lady in the church. I'm like, oh, why is that? And they told me a story. I was like, oh, it doesn't seem like something would have bothered her. Okay. I was talking to her later, and she said, I don't think they like me. I said, oh, why is that? She told me a story. It had nothing to do with the first story. And I'm like, oh, so we have both just concocted these things in our brains that the other person doesn't like me. I suggested to both, maybe you should go talk to them and find out what this is. Well, we're just going to leave it alone. Okay. It's fine. And they did. And just complicated everything. But you're going to have people unkind. So we have to be willing to forgive. We love to talk about forgiveness. And how many times should I forgive a brother? 7 times? I mean, is there anybody in here that has forgiven their brother 7 times? Anybody? Okay. And Jesus said, no, not 7 times, but 70 times 7. 490 times. Now, I don't think he was giving us a goal to shoot for. I don't think he was saying, listen, at 489, you know you're about done. I think what he was doing is, if you cultivate a heart of forgiveness aiming at 490 times, you're going to lose count. You're going to get to the point where you're like, oh, it's them. I just got to forgive them. Just forgive them. Forgive them. Forgive them. Forgive them. I have had to practice something in my own life, and that is forgiveness before ever asked. Because if you sit around and wait for people to ask for forgiveness, chances are you'll never have to forgive anybody. Very few times will people come and say, hey, I'm sorry, can you forgive me? So my practice has been, I'm just going to forgive you before. In fact, I'm probably going to forgive you before it even registers in your mind that you did something unkind. And it's not for your sake, by the way. It's for mine. I don't want to be carrying it around. I'll be like, I wonder how long it's going to be before they ask. This is 367 times. I don't want to be carrying it around. And so I'll just forgive. I'll just forgive. Now, I do have to put this disclaimer on there. If it's against my family, you probably don't get the same treatment. I'm not as forgiving well, my boys, yeah, I mean, they're big boys. They can handle themselves. You deal with them. My wife, probably not going to get the forgiven before you ask. In fact, you might be confronted about what happened. My daughter-in-laws, chances are their husbands are going to deal with it. And if they don't, then I'll deal with them and then you. My granddaughter, don't try it. That's death. That's the way it works. By the way, keep an eye on your little boys around the church. Yeah. If one of them comes missing, they mess with my granddaughter. I don't know what to tell you. But we want to cultivate that forgiveness. When people are unkind, people are going to say things. People are going to say things that they don't even intend to be unkind. How do you know? Because I've done it. I've gotten texts from people, Pastor, it hurt when you said such and such. I'm like, if that hurt, wait to hear what I didn't. No, I'm just kidding. You're going to say something to somebody, and it's going to be received by them as it's unkind. And so there's going to be times where you get things said to you, and you're going to think, oh, they're mean. So forgive one another, forgiving one another. What's the standard for forgiving? I love this. The last part of verse 32. Even as God for Christ's sake hath forgiven you. Do you understand that the standard for forgiveness that you're to give others is the forgiveness you've been given? Wow. I think if we truly understood how deplorable our sin is to a holy God, and if we understood His forgiveness, we'd have no problem forgiving anybody of anything. Nothing. But we get the idea that, well, I mean, come on. I was a church boy. Grew up in the church, went to Christian school. I've been through youth group and Awana clubs and junior church. I mean, I worked in junior church. Then I went to Bible college. Who have I really offended? I hope they don't watch this, because we'll get all sorts of feedback from people in Shingle House. It was like, oh, he offended me here, and he offended me there. All sorts of stuff. But we get the idea that we're much better than we really are. And we don't truly understand the forgiveness that God has given us, or we would quickly forgive others. I mean, Jesus was nailed to the cross for my sin. Well, so-and-so said something mean to me. Really? Do you have scars from it? I mean, if you can show me your hands and there's nail prints, then you might have something to justify that. But short of that, they should already be forgiven. Now, some of it, I agree, will need to be confronted. Because if you don't confront it, they're going to do it again, and they're probably doing it to other people. So sometimes you have to confront it and say, hey, just watch what you're doing. Be careful. Be kind. But all of it needs to be forgiven. I don't want to carry burdens through this life that God intended for me to be released from. And bitterness is one of them. Well, I can't. I've mentioned this several times in the last couple of months. There are kids I say kids, we're all in our 40s or 50s now, that grew up in the church I grew up in, that will not step foot back in that church. Even when they're in town to visit family, they won't go to Grace Bible. And I'm like, I didn't understand. My mom told me one time, she goes, well, so-and-so, they're never coming back to church. I said, well, why not? Well, because the way they were treated here. I'm like, I grew up in the same time period, went to the same youth group, sat in the same Sunday school classes, was under the same pastor. What happened? Mom didn't know. She didn't have any evidence. She didn't have any proof, which is part of why I think it doesn't exist. But something happened. And that person just chose to carry it. And it went on and on and on and on. And here we are. Let's see, I left Grace Bible in 94. Almost 30 years ago. And this person still will not enter the doors of that church because of that bitterness. I don't want to be like that. Now, do I agree with everybody at Grace Bible? No. Was everybody just 100% kind? No. But there's nothing that ever happened to me on Grace Bible property that would keep me from going back to that church. The reality of us carrying bitterness, it hurts me when people leave our church hurt. It really does. And sometimes it's in their own mind. We've had people leave, no lie. We've had people leave because they thought the pastor said something. Like, well, why didn't you ask me if I said it? Or even if I said it, let's deal with the fact that, okay, I may have been wrong. But to leave because you thought the pastor said something. I didn't get a class on that in college. How to know what your people are thinking you thought, or said you thought, or thought you said, or I don't know. I don't want to carry any bitterness. And I don't know every story here. I know this, we're here on a Wednesday night, and I thought to the Lord, this is probably the crowd that has dealt most with their past. That is functioning from a place a lot closer to the unity of the Spirit than some people. However, He designed that I would preach this on a Wednesday night, and so I don't know what you're carrying. I don't know what's holding you back. I don't know what kind of bitterness you've got built up. I don't know what kind of hurt in the past that just keeps getting pushed down and pushed down and pushed down, and every time something triggers it, you lose it. But I know this, the Lord wants us to be kind. He wants us to be tenderhearted, and He wants us to forgive as He's forgiven. I like the way it's worded there, for Christ's sake. Do you understand that's the even as? I don't forgive for my sake. I don't forgive for your sake. We've got to forgive from a position of, it's for Jesus' sake. It's for the sake of the cause of Christ. I think one of the problems in getting the world to even entertain the idea of coming to the church is the church is so divided. Well, I just think about this. We've got 34 churches in town. 34 different Christian churches in town. Why do you have to have 34 different buildings if they're all following the same Jesus? So the world goes, oh, well, I would go to church if I thought they had something that I needed. And it's even worse when you come to a church building and you find out there's division there. Hence the statement I made at the beginning of this whole study, and that is, if we could just live Ephesians 4, the church would be much more successful in the mission that we're called to. Let's bow for a prayer. Father, we do thank you for this evening. Lord, I pray that you would help us. Lord, I don't know everybody's story here. I don't know all the details, but God, I pray that if there's one here that is carrying things from the past, and Lord, they may not even realize how much they've been affected by something. Lord, I pray that you'd give them the boldness to be able to speak about it, and Lord, to get the help that's needed. And Lord, I pray that you would help each of us to examine our hearts. And Lord, that we would purpose in our minds that we're going to be kind, and that we're going to be tender-hearted. Lord, if someone's talking to us and sharing their story and the details of their life, I pray that we would be sensitive, that we'd be impressionable, and Lord, that we would actually carry that burden for them just because we're tender-hearted. And Lord, pray that you'd help us to forgive. Lord, help us to be quick to forgive those that would hurt us. And Lord, I pray that we would understand how truly forgiven we are in you. And Lord, we ask this all in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.